So it's 2 o'clock, and welcome to this webinar organized as part of the ISRICM project, a European Union social initiative project where we are working to support the integration of
Interesting.
Ukrainian refugees. But without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the first of our three speakers on screen, Lisa Collins, and also an author of the book, The Physiology of Bullying, which actually sort of is extremely relevant to this discussion about leadership in workplaces. But Lisa, please let us know more about what you've been working on and how this actually relates to the future of leadership in European workplaces.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lars. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm really, really grateful. So I'm going to start talking about well-being and also why empathy matters in leadership. So to start, I don't have any slides. I'm happy to take questions. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. And I'll try to fit as much as I can in 10 minutes. So there's a lot to cover. I'm going to start with, if we're serious about well-being, we have to be serious about empathy in leadership, how it breaks and how we need to restore it. So I'm going to start with psychological safety, the new buzzword that we've all been hearing about now for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I'm going to break that down to look at actually what it is and why it matters. When we talk about psychological safety, we've got research to show that only 17% of people actually know how to implement psychological safety. So when I work with leaders in healthcare, I quite often get told, I tell my team every week they're psychologically safe. Psychological safety, to be really clear, is an action. It's not something that we can say. We have to demonstrate it. And I'll go further into that because lots of people don't know how to implement it. So the way that I look at psychological safety is it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're all familiar with that pyramid triangle. And if we think about the top part of that as the self-actualization, I see the top part of that as psychological safety. The actual bits that we need to do day to day as leaders are the building blocks that sit underneath it, which are safety, trust, connection, belonging. How can we as leaders and managers put those things in place day to day? And when we do, that just creates psychological safety. So I think it's important to pick that apart a little bit and understand what that is, because I often find that leaders struggle to understand psychological safety and the day-to-day doing. And why does that matter? Well, it matters when we think about empathy, because if we don't have a sense of safety, if we don't have a sense of connection and belonging, we lose our ability to connect with our fellow workers, our fellow human beings in the workplace, and we lose our ability to have empathy. Now, we quite often look at organizations from a theory perspective of, are organizations machines or are they living systems? And if we look at a typical factory assembly line, very often we'll equate that to mechanistic ways of working. But the reality is organizations are messy and they're full of humans who bring their whole selves to the workplace. And I'm seeing as well now a shift within leadership and organization development to really understanding more of the organization as a living organism and how people show up and how leadership should respond in that. I'm also seeing a shift away from this hierarchical leadership to much more, I'm not going to say power sharing, but it's the power with. How can we sit with our teams? How can we move away from this one big brain that sits at the top of the organization to how can we become more of a coach? How can we sit alongside our team? How can we create that safety? And how can we unlock the best that we can from our fellow workers? So, to go into a little bit more detail now about empathy, I want to just take you to burnout. My background is in healthcare, and I've worked in healthcare for 36 years. And quite often we'll hear people talking about this huge burnout in organizations. I challenge that. I don't think we have an epidemic of burnout. I think we have an epidemic of people trapped in the threat response. We're all familiar with the fight, flight, and freeze response. So I just want to pause here for a moment and just hover onto some of these issues. And this is the information that I went into when I was doing the research around my book. When we get triggered into the threat response, it's automatic. We have no control. When we don't feel safe in the workplace, we get triggered into that fight or flight or freeze. We're all familiar with it. I encourage people to understand what's your go-to. So, for example, I know my go-to would be fight, for example, but I also know when I go into flight, there's a new addition to the threat response called fawn. Now, we didn't have that millions of years ago when we were running from a bear or a tiger, but we have that in organizations where we are dependent on organizations for our livelihood. So quite often, you can't often leave an organization where you don't feel safe or if you're being bullied and you go into that fawning mode. Worse than that is freeze. So I now invite leaders to understand a lot more about the threat response. So when you look at your team, something really interesting happens because from the lens that we're currently looking through from leadership and from organizations, we look at our team through the lens of performance management. So is somebody being aggressive, obstructive, or actually are they in the fight response? Is somebody avoiding meetings, not turning up to meetings on time, or is somebody in fight or flight, sorry? Do we have somebody who is people pleasing, doesn't have an opinion, always agreeing with what you have to say, never push back? Or is that somebody in fawn? And do we have somebody who is just non-responsive? You can't get this individual to show up, to do the work, to complete tasks, or are they in freeze and shut down? So I invite leaders to shift their lens away from the standard organizational language that we currently have around performance management and use the lens of the threat response to look at their colleagues. Because when we do that, we open up our compassion lens, and that's where empathy comes in. Because if we're looking purely through the lens of, I've got individuals coming into the workplace, they're not performing, you go down the performance management route, and we all know where that ends. Whereas if you look through the lens of the threat response, we're more likely to open up our compassion, our empathy. And if we're really connected to our teams, we will know way ahead of time whether or not there is something going on for our team members. Because if we're not connected to our team members, we've lost that connection. We've lost that opportunity for empathy. We've lost that opportunity to step in at an earlier stage and ask, what do you need from me to support you? And I'd go deeper than that in terms of the context of this webinar. What do I need to make you feel safe? So when you've got people come into organizations, if we think about it, coming from a traumatized background, if we're thinking about refugees coming into the workplace, we have to look through the lens of the threat response. We have to use the language of safety. We have to invite that conversation with our team members and say, what is it that I need to do as a manager or leader to make you feel safe? And that's the starting point. If we don't do that, we're losing the opportunity for connection and we're losing the opportunity for empathy. And we're not unlocking the gold that's inside each and every one of our colleagues. And that's really what we want. Because if we go back to the start of this, it's like if we're serious about well-being, we have to be serious about empathy. If we're serious about business, then we have to be serious about our teams and our colleagues and how we can get the best out of them. So just to start to bring this towards a close, as leaders, as managers, we all have the gift to be able to offer our colleagues safety. If we look at the trauma science, it is absolutely clear when we've got people trapped in the threat response for too long a time, it rewires the nervous system, it rewires their brains. Dr. Jen Fraser has done some fantastic research on this recently in her book, The Gaslit Brain and the Bullied Brain. We've got people who can go into MRI scans and we can show what parts of the brain are inflamed and getting bigger, and what parts of the brain are degrading and getting smaller. The evidence of that is clear. So I'm not introducing any new language, any new research. It all already exists. All I've done is start to join up some of the dots and bring it into that leadership space. And obviously, my background being an anti-bullying advocate, I've looked at it through the lens of bullying in the workplace as well. So, my invitation to all leaders and HR experts on this call, when you are recruiting, when you are supporting your staff for well-being, I invite you to look through the lens of the threat response, because what you see in terms of your teams and how they show up is very, very different to the ways that we have done it for very many years. And I think I'd like to end on that point and just to remember we all have the gift to make our teams feel safe. And it's all inbuilt in all of us. Every parent on the call will know what it means to be able to regulate your nervous system and co-regulate others. And these are the key skills that we need to bring back into the workplace. And we need to celebrate them, and we need to promote them more and more if we want our colleagues to turn up and feel safe. On that point, I'm going to close down, and hopefully that's kept within the 10 minutes. Any questions, please pop them in the chat and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And of course, in a second, we'll be moving on with Katerina Ostrovska as well. And I think also one of the questions in the chat as well is, of course, or there are comments, of course, related to the elements about how bullying also can lead into something that is not just transitory, but stays with you and turns into intergenerational trauma as well. And it doesn't actually matter per se whether the bullying is something that happened at work or in your life as in a warlike situation. Even though it would not normally be called bullying, it still actually translates into trauma, of course.
Yeah.
There's one question in the chat, and I think that relates to the leaders. What do leaders do? I think from Louise, what do leaders do if teams do not want to connect using that? Is that, of course, I suppose the element here is the call to be able to look through that lens of the trauma response is not one that is normally found. So you're also asking people not just to use a skill, but also a relation that they're not necessarily used to, which in itself, we're human beings, generates anxiety,
Mm.
not just for the leaders, but for the staff itself. How have you felt that interaction? Also, I suppose in your promotion of the book, what's been the feedback?
Well, the feedback on the book to begin with has been phenomenal. It reached a #1 status within 48 hours. So that was just brilliant. But it also signals how much of a problem this actually is. Um, Two things that I wanted to say were, and I talk about this in the book as well, is there's also an element of organizational betrayal that also causes a trauma response. And and I think it's interesting because one of the things that I couldn't personally myself get my head around was the word trauma. I didn't identify with it. But when we look at what trauma is, I don't think anybody gets away in life not experiencing trauma. And I certainly didn't equate trauma to the workplace. But when we look at what it is and how it's created, when we're stuck in our nervous system response for a prolonged period of time, that's going to create trauma within the body. So I think what I'm doing is just, I'm inviting, and again, it's not a new language in terms of the language already exists, but I'm inviting language that we don't normally use into the workplace. And I think for me, that's been the missing key. And also, the last 5 years, I've been running a public health project. And that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me as well, to look at bullying through the eyes of a public health issue, but also a public health approach as to how we combat it. Go into Louise's question about how do we connect with teams who don't want to connect. This is where we're inviting a much deeper conversation, and this is where it gets gritty, and most leaders and managers feel uncomfortable in this space. But if somebody's been through trauma, they're not just going to offer all that up. You know, they have to feel safe. And this is where safety comes in as the absolute medicine for this. And it might take some time. So that initial organizational approach of how do we engage with staff and they don't want to engage, once we look through the lens of the trauma response, it might take quite a bit of time and repeated attempts of how to connect with that individual. And everyone will be different. So their safety connection will be different for every single person because we don't know what they've been through and we shouldn't be making assumptions. So I would say to open up the conversation and invite that conversation to just be a bit gentle, take some time and understand what does that safety look like. And it could be that you use words like, what is it that I can do to make you feel safe? If you don't want to use those words, you can still use different words, but know the actions that you're doing is how can I make this person in front of me safe? I think that's the only job we ever need to do. You know, if we show up and we just, what can I do to make people feel safe around me? That feels the most important job that I can do in my whole life. So I would say be patient, ask the question, allow yourselves to go deeper. It's not one size that fits all. And that's where I see leaders now, and I've always equated leadership to the role of a conductor because it's not one size fits all. It is as the conductor, you look at your orchestra, how do I engage with different members of the orchestra in different ways to pull the best out of them? And that's the way that we need to kind of titrate leadership. So hopefully that answers your question, Louise.
So, and Louise, you're welcome to also use the chat to sort of both comment, reflect, or ask another question. But moving on, and with the comment slightly, of course, flippant of using a situation from war to the bullying of trauma, our next speaker has both lived experience and professional experience with this area. Katerina Ostrovska, currently living in Lithuania, and of course that's part of the story and relevant to the webinar today. That is, of course, not where you're originally from. And with a smile as well, I know, Katerina, that you've recently said that you've left part of your soul in California, which is also not where you're from. But nice, of course, that souls can also migrate. But in this area, please also, Katerina, your reflections on how leadership plays a role in these organizations and their ability to also work with both recruitment, but also the existing staff in creating well-being.
Well, firstly, I would like to say that I'm really grateful for this opportunity to kind of to convene my experience as a professional who worked with the health workforce planning for quite a long time. I think 3 years working in the nationwide planning project. It's a big thing. And as a person who also left Ukraine in the second week of the full-scale invasion, I can say that I have a deeply rooted feeling of kind of a forceful migration. And for me, this open conversation, the way how Lisa elegantly put the way that we should create safety, this is actually what brought Ukrainians to the places where they're stationed now. And I'm a person who got used to operate much more report-like rhetoric. So I would like to take kind of as helicopter view on the situation because as the managers we need to know what's happening around to be very system-wide thinkers. And let's imagine that almost 7 million of the population left the country. Around 4 million now reside in Europe. And of course, weaponization of migration became an issue. And we also need to be sensitive and sensible about that. And the ratio of the Ukrainians per natives in such countries like Germany, Poland, Czechia is the greatest. And of course, you can feel this tension. Especially there were some reports in Poland. So it's something that we need to be mindful of. it's a kind of a backdrop in which we're operating now. And we also might be hearing the way that Ukrainians are not employed, are willing to stay unemployed and getting benefits from the countries. But also, let's be cognizant of the information which is publicly available. And it says that depending on the availability of the labor market, it really varies. But let's say respondents in Poland state that around 80% of the respondents were employed. So what does it say to us? It's just a mismatch and a certain way that might be threaten the perception of Ukrainians in the society, which does not kind of create the value of them as the employees, and also doesn't create the safety in the working ambience. So let's move further. And if we think how the dynamics of the employment works, there are different theories. And the human capital theory states that if we look at the individual, he or she has a value in the labor market as the composition of productive qualities, education, training, language proficiency, work experience. But if you start to think that the person who left the country might not be as fluent in foreign language, or foreign credentials might not be recognized or immediately recognized, this means that Ukrainian, they at the risk of this language deficiency or non-recognition of foreign credentials to be underemployed and happen to be placed in the lower wage position. So it's also kind of diminish the value of the personal professional one. Then we move to the idea that also the segmentation of the assimilation matters. And it was seen in different research areas that it's a dynamics. It's not only a person who's being taken out of the country and placed kind of seamlessly introduced into the labor market in a different country. It's not, doesn't work like that. Let's think that there is also a certain labor market dynamics in that particular country, which might not be susceptible to taking new blood to kind of even to raise the economy. Although I should emphasize that Ukrainians, when they moved at least to Poland, they raised the GDP. And let's think about this segmentation. And as it showed that there is a huge risk of high-skilled individuals to be in precarious, low-status job. The kind of landlocked, and even this, at the first sight, positive way of introducing workforce model, which worked in Poland, and now it happened to be having a very bad side, is if rapid precarious integration into the low wage segment. So Ukrainians tend to be in the agriculture, in the service, and it doesn't really offer limited long-term career prospects. But on the other hand, different countries, let's say Germany, it introduced in another way, another paradigm that states that people need to be upskilled, they need to get their credentials recognized, and also the sufficient level of language is a must. And what can we see? It's a long-term investment which has been paid off with a 68% of employment in the previous years. So it's something that should be not kind of introduced only organization-wide, but also region-wide, nation-wide. It's a kind of an advocacy for that, how we want to people get assembled, and whether there's an interest for the raise of the economy, if we start to think kind of in a broad sense. And what I would also like to add is that, of course, if you can look into the distribution. Countrywide, there are different distribution, different rates of employment. But again, the closer to the Western kind of old Europe you go, the more high education population of Ukraine you will find there, and all the way around. And it's also the trend. If you start to organize the service, you can see that those who are well employed, who feel their credentials being recognized, and they feel satisfied in their job occupation, the lower the plans, the percentage wise to return, which is kind of very understandable in this in this dynamics of the work continuation. But also, I would also add for my personal experience is that the support of diaspora matters in those places where there is a more densely populated diaspora, let's say Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or let's be honest, Russian-speaking population. Those might be Russified Baltic countries. It's easier to get into contact, so people tend to stick there as well. It's an easy entry point. And also, let's face the idea that it's something that should be advocated by the managers is the authorization to work and the prospects of Ukrainian long-term integration. If we talk about the European countries, Ukrainian credentials, Ukrainian residency was adopted until 2027. And what comes next, nobody knows. So whether this person should invest the time for upskilling or not, what is the level of safety, what is the level of security of the upcoming future? And this uncertainty does not give much motivation to be an effective and efficient worker if you don't know what would be the next step, whether you will be discontinued or you will be able to develop your professional skills in this particular area. And probably I might stop on this for probably for the sake of adding my personal perspective. I can say for those who were able to find upskilling opportunities. Let's say Europe has been doing well in certain areas. Let's say medical professionals were given certain easier access to the labor market given the shortage of the workforce Europe-wide. But on the other hand, not all the areas were so well served and well prepared to accept new coming labor. So in this sense, I would like to say that it's a way that should be seen from different perspectives, not only as a person who comes into the team, but also as the team should be prepared. The organization, the regional authorities, the nationwide concept of mutual recognition and collaboration around the migration that might be a new wave and new impulse for the mutual development, economic development for the first thing. So that's mostly from my side.
Well, thank you so much, Katerina. A lot of different perspectives on this matter. One of the key elements I think would be worth to carry with us in this conversation and further as well is the element of uncertainty. I guess we human beings will always want to have perfect clarity and safety, as psychological safety, as Lisa mentioned before, but we're also stuck in a reality where uncertainty is, well, a thing, both from a personal situation and also at a system level. And in this case, of course, we're mostly talking about the level with which workplaces can improve a situation so it leads to less uncertainty, more safety, but the overarching issues of how labor markets and nation states also ensures that there's a certainty for people is, of course, an element as well. But moving on, before we go into that great and good discussion, our third speaker today, Nina Sunderberg, my colleague in the Nordic Wellbeing Academy, and also part of this ISRICM project. Some reflections from the ISRICM project and how to bridge, perhaps, or at least marry this element of obviously needing psychological safety in a situation where there's high uncertainty and challenges. What have we come up with so far, Nina?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Lisa and Katarina, for your insightful details into this webinar on leadership. We have been working in the project with recommendations for leaders, managers, but also for workplaces in general. And we based the principles on emotion-focused therapy. So principles from psychotherapy is actually the base of the report. And of course, we are willing to share the report if anyone is interested in reading it. But here are some of the initial recommendations for managers. So we based this on emotion-focused therapy, but also we asked ourselves, why do we want to integrate emotion-focused principles into workplaces? And Lisa talked a little bit about how trauma is also a language that we need to understand when we consider workplaces also. So I'm not going to go into that because she talked about that very clearly. But when we talk about workplace integration concerning refugees, we need to know and to understand that this is not only an HR process, it's actually an emotional one. So when we look at refugees and people with trauma, we need to understand that everybody is adapting to a new role, a new workplace culture, entirely new country at the same time. These are a lot of things in a person's life that they need to work with at the same time. So when we look at research and what it takes to make employees feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense of psychological safety, we know that one of the things that actually comes out of it, if we have to look at the outcome also, we know that they perform better, they stay longer, and they engage more deeply within the workplace. So when we look at these principles from emotion-focused therapy, we can see that these are the ones that can actually help refugees succeed even more. But it also strengthens the workplace entirely because these are principles that can work across the organization. First of all, we need to understand what is the refugee context. We need to understand that refugees are not one single group with the same background or needs. So Lisa also mentioned that it's not a one size fits all. And that's really, really important to think about. It's a diverse group in terms of skills, education, age, and professional experience, like Katarina just mentioned before. And many bring a lot of really strong work ethics, valuable perspectives, but on the other hand, they might also face language barriers, cultural differences, or stress linked to being displaced or having lost somebody very close to them. So as a leader, it's a key to move away from seeing refugees only as a vulnerable group, but also looking at them as capable professionals who are trying to rebuild their careers and lives while learning new languages, settling in a new country, etc., etc. So this perspective sets a foundation for a respectful and effective integration. So that's the key element to understand. When we look at some of the emotion-focused leadership principles, we need to understand that when we are emotion-focused in our leadership, we need to be trauma-informed. We need to be emotionally aware. So if we have workplaces where behavior as hesitation, anxiety, quietness is a part of the workplace behavior, this might stress even more people who are newcomers into the workplace. So therefore, leaders play a critical role in modeling empathy and reflective listening. So the key role here is actually modeling. Psychological safety is, of course, essential, as Lisa also emphasized. People must feel safe enough to ask questions, to admit mistakes, to raise concerns without fear of negative consequences. So when these environments are created, we can see that learning and trust is something that's in focus. So when we talk about, for example, inclusive hiring, it's very important to set the tone early. We can look at the recruitment process and try to ensure that interviewers are culturally and emotionally aware. So this also includes being flexible about credentials and also being patient with language differences or cultural differences, and avoid overly aggressive interview styles. So being patient, being modest, being curious, taking your time. For example, like small actions of clearly explaining the process or allowing candidates to think about answering a question sends a powerful message between the lines that this is a safe place to be. So this is from the beginning a very important process. When we also talk about the onboarding, the belonging, the retention period, it's very important to think about clear expectations, but also one thing that our report is really emphasizing is the consistent follow through. So having not necessarily one mentor, but maybe two mentors. So you build a place where you can have one that you really feel a professional bond with, but another mentor that you feel a social or psychological safety bond with. It can be different people from the workplace that you use for different needs. A lot of organizations also give feedbacks that refugees employees actually demonstrate a high loyalty when they feel supported, and that makes sense. That when people feel supported in a very difficult situation in their life, they would actually go a long way to succeed at an organization. So it should be very clear for everybody how growth pathways are seen in the organizations. It should be visible for everybody to say, okay, I might be starting at the floor, but I know that within 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months, I would have a conversation with my leader about what other options are there in this workplace. So giving the possibility of actually being aware of other positions in the organization is also one key element. So to finish off, if the recommendations for leaders and what they should remember that emotions actually drive performance. So when we look at the psychological safety, which we have mentioned many times today, we know that this is something that enables learning, growth, resilience. And when we look at how to have the emotion focused principle in workplaces, it's not only a nice to have, it actually directly impacts retention, engagement, and strength in the organizations. So leaders are the ones who should set the tone through empathy, consistency, and curiosity. When refugee employees are supported to thrive, teams become stronger, cultures become healthier, and organizations become more resilient overall. So when we are brave enough to also dare to be vulnerable as leaders or managers, the model for that would of course be something that the rest of the organization could use. Yeah, I think
Very good. Thank you, Nina.
yeah.
And I would, of course, also think that it would be really relevant at this point to ask, well, both Lisa and Katarina and also our other participants to comment. And of course, if you will, in trying to build a bridge that I mentioned before, it's quite okay to also talk about whether you actually like the bridge. It might be sometimes bridge are beautiful, sometimes they actually can be horrible, and sometimes they just do the job. But the question is, of course, whether it does that, and might maybe also whether we can find ways to also make sure that we can both build more and also improve the quality of that bridge to make sure that that happens. From your perspective, some of the key elements here in both getting the good advice that Nina just mentioned and your advice, Lisa, into the European workplaces, into the HR organizations, and into the leadership of the European workplaces, and I suppose also from your perspective, Katerina, how clearly there are, and the reason why we're here today is, of course, because paradise do not exist. We are not where we wanted things to be, but are we sort of at the beginning of a long journey? Are we at the middle, or are we only sort of do we have only small things to do before we are at the end of this important but still, of course, not finalized journey? Um, some reflections, please. And of course, on how to also make sure that we, both as organizations, but also as human beings, use the leadership that we can to advance this.
I'm happy to go first.
Yes, please.
I think we're at the start of the journey, to be honest. I think in terms of the change curve that we quite often see that model, I think there has been some sort of early adopters that have been leading the way for quite some time. But I think for the masses in general, I think we are at the start of this conversation, and I think it's about how do we integrate some of this language within organizations. Three things that stand out to me. In terms of the uncertainty that you talked about, Lars, I think that's become our new normal. And I don't think we should fear it. I like to think about, in terms of creating safety during uncertainty, as that entrepreneurial spirit. So rather than it's something that we fear and we think it's something that we're not comfortable with, how can we start to get really comfortable in that uncertainty? And there are things that we can do to put in little stepping stones of safety, whether that's daily practices, weekly practices, it can be absolutely anything. And if we liken that to this entrepreneurial spirit of we don't know what the outcome's going to look like, and actually that's okay, because if we really want to create change, if we really want to create transformation and innovation, the reality is we work it out as we go along anyway. And it's always been that way. So I think there's just, for me, a little bit of clearing up and creating some transparency around where we are and not to fear it and to get comfortable in the uncertainty, because the reality is life has always been uncertain. We like as humans to put, boundaries around things and make them very neat and have neat stepping stones. But the reality is life is not like that. And I think the instability that we see in the world at the moment is kind of bringing that to the forefront. So one, let's not fear it. Let's get comfortable in the uncertainty. We can put some little personal stepping stones in that make us feel safe and our teams feel safe. But let's think about this from that entrepreneurial perspective and become excited about it, because from that position, we can create new things that we potentially never imagined before. So I see that as an opportunity. Something that I think that we need to be aware of is language. So when we have got people who are refugees coming into different countries, different workplaces, the language here is really important, that we don't other people. So how can we change the language that we're using so we don't accidentally have that othering? The reason I say that, I worked in a homeless health project for 5 years, and it became really clear to me about language and othering people. So, and it's something that slips in for all of us. So it's something that's quite often unconscious, but just to be a bit more cognizant of that and a bit more sensitive around language, because this is about how can we, have our arms open, be inclusive, and speak in a way that we're not othering. And also to see the opportunities of when we have people coming from different backgrounds, there's gold, that we can see there's gold in people that they bring to the workplace. And when we kind of integrate that with everything else that everybody brings, it feels like this mulch of experience and humanness and all the things that we bring together. It's all the good stuff. I think we need to remember there's gold in that. And how can we harness that rather than see it as messy and inconvenient and uncomfortable? So yeah, that's my 3 reflections.
I can see that Nina, you have a comment or it's just a high five because you agree?
It's also a high five, but it's also something I reflected on when Lisa was talking. From the report, we also talked about being curious, but we also talked about the goal that there is in having different people, different human beings on a workplace. How can we elaborate even more on that goal? So one of the recommendations in the report is that could we, for example, share some cultural holidays? Could we have some guests invited in to talk about how the cultural holidays are celebrated in each countries? Or could we have like different evenings with different foods of taste, or different lunch with different foods that people bring along? So we talk about an inclusive workplace, but what is that? Could some of these recommendations also be a part of that, where not necessarily we talk about what's going on in the city, but what's going on in the entire world, where we have the workplace that has connection in the entire world. So looking at the workplace as a mini society where everybody should be included, and having tools to actually elaborate on that was some of the things that I was thinking about.
Thank you. I'm kind of assuming, Katerina, well, thank you, you've beat me to it, that you also have a comment as to this, Katerina, please.
I mean, just it's so easy to piggyback on such profound thoughts, but I will try to kind of to cover these tiny places that were left not that well highlighted, I believe so. So I think that firstly, uncertainty is the material for scenario planning. This is what I learned from my foresight training. And in the sense, of course, there is a big kind of grand kind of uncertainty, but even in our tiny organizations, we can try to think that, okay, we wanted to see our organization sustainable. What are the strength position? What are the threats around us? And how this person and Yuan might be an element to a great future. Of course, if we analyze from the status quo, this might be a person who is not as fluent as we would like to, has not gained certain clarity around the scope of work. And how do we view our bright future with this person on board in this kind of scenario? Might this be a value? How can we kind of leverage this? And also it brings a little bit to the lean management. I know there are not all of the managers are kind of great fans of this particular approach, but in my view, when we view every process, even talent management, from the standpoint of waste and value. We also can see everything that happens in this relational part of the organizational kind of functioning, in the sense that what is our management of the value creation with the help of this particular person. The second thing is about talent management and coaching. So we should not be afraid to coach a person, because it's the place that you can raise the talent to that kind of height you would like to raise your organization, not a particular person. So you're just growing all together. It's like a blooming garden you're raising, right? And also, kind of circling back on Lars mentioned, I left my soul in California. I spent 10 months during my Fulbright program, and it was such an amazing experience of being kind of in America is really in a melting pot. I think it's not everything I would take from that overseas territory, but this kind of feeling of a melting pot where it doesn't really matter where you're from. And I would like Europe also had this, so it doesn't really matter. Like you always feel that there is a certain accent, you can hear it, and you understand this. It's second or even a third language. So this person committed a lot to gain that fluency and should be recognized. And this person brings something like the whole story. And this is something you should not be afraid to open up, as Nina proposed, through the shared meals or any types of recreational activities. There may be a lot to that, but probably that's that's all from me.
Some good perspectives too. I have seen in the chat a couple of comments as well to supplement, where some of it, of course, is there's the overarching question, I suppose, as well, in the terms of also talking about leadership. There are things that we as humans, individuals, professionals can do, but there's also maybe a big question about how do we also move towards the needed leadership, not just from, well, me, you, but from our wider European community that we're part of. This is a challenge that we should take upon ourselves, yes, but it's also one where we need to recognize that it's a challenge that's beyond our individual efforts, and how to move from systems leadership more into actually being part of that debate. Have you, I mean, either from I guess it would be fair to say, Lisa, that you have experienced change in the last couple of years in your journey as a human being, and that would be a sort of an understatement in your case as well, Katerina. But how do we also make sure that these profound changes that we have before us, that we actually include more to be part of the leadership that we need to change this narrative and this situation? And of course, as you say, Lisa, we might be at the beginning of the journey, and while paradise might await us at the end, if we do all of these great things, we're still in 2020. We're now in 2026. That's worth reminding ourselves. But how come we're still maybe also 250 years after the Industrial Revolution, we're still at the beginning of this journey?
I can give some reflections to that. I think for many of us, we've become very domesticated, women in particular. And I think what we're seeing now, or what I'm noticing in terms of patterns, is there's a lot of breaking free from that, a lot of waking up. So that's exciting. And I think the call to action is for individuals to really tap into what is it that they're being called to put into the world, because we've all got a mission. We've all got a passion. We've all got something to offer. And I don't believe that everybody's actually tuned into that in terms of their own personal power, their own personal unique offering to the world. However, I see that people are starting to become activated and waking up to that. So I see the groundswell will come the more people start noticing, one, their external environment is changing. Because for many of us, within that domestication, there has been safety, there has been predictability, there has been certainty, and it's been comfortable. It's a comfort zone. And as that comfort zone strips away, we're all individually being asked to examine, what's working in our lives and what isn't. And I see that as an invitation for everybody to tap into what is it that I'm being called forth to bring into the world. So releasing the book last year has been something I've been thinking about for many, many years. And I wrote the book 5 years ago. But last year I felt that individual call to action to put it out into the world. I'm noticing within my leadership work and coaching that more and more people are getting to that stage. So we've all got that unique offering. And I would say for everybody, it's time to tap into that because, like Katerina said earlier, in terms of the garden metaphor, when we bring all that forward, then we create this beautiful, abundant garden that has all different life and growth within it. And that's what we need in order to move humanity forward into this next paradigm shift. Because the paradigm shift is already happening. And so there's no going back. And again, when we think about the change curve, we're going to have those early adopters and we're going to have the people who hesitate and the laggards. But we're all going to be going through this paradigm shift. For me, the exciting thing is tap into what your contribution is and get onto that wave and ride it because it's going to be exciting. We don't know where it's going to head, but we know we have an opportunity as humanity to create something very, very different. And I see the motivations there. So it's just a matter of time that we've got people waking up to the individual responsibility that's what they need to do.
A wonderful message of hope and ambition as well. Katerina,
Yes, I can see
wonderful.
we're on the top of the hour. So if you allow me, just kind of, I think it will be great supplement to what Elisa has said. I really find fascinating the Kotter's change management model. As a person who was involved into the reform dynamics, I realized there is not such a thing that kind of has everything in it, just like it's different stages. But if you allow me, I would cite. So we now kind of already place on the first place of this kind of model. We need to create a sense of urgency around a single big opportunity. Then we build and maintain a guiding coalition. We formulate a strategic vision, develop change initiatives designed to capitalize on the big opportunity. Then we communicate the vision and the strategy to create buy-in and attract a growing volunteer army. Further, we accelerate movement toward the vision and the opportunity by ensuring that the network removes barriers. Further, celebrate visible, significant short-term wins. It's very important. Next, never we let up. We keep learning from experience. We don't declare victory too soon. And here we are. The last place we're getting to is we're institutionalizing strategic changes in the culture. So I think it just all in one has different kind of facets to this change. That's it.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful experience to have you with us, or every single one of you, both speakers and participants. Thank you so much for the wonderful comments. Nina and I will try both to integrate some of these great comments into the project reporting that we've been doing. And of course, as mentioned, also issue this wonderful recording for others to see. We might be at the beginning of the journey, but at least we have great fellows to travel with us. And possibly maybe as a half quote of Tolkien, it is actually possible to make it all the way there and back again. So thank you so much for today and look forward to continue just a few steps on this journey with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Lars.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.